In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern. We're also, of course, going to be taking a deep dive into our potential upcoming tropical cyclone that I am particularly concerned about. So if you are along the Gulf Coast or the East Coast, you're going to really want to watch this video in its entirety. We're going to be deep diving, like I mentioned, into the European model, the GFS model, the Ensemble models, and even some AI models. So we are really doing a deep scan of basically every output that we have right now for this potential tropical cyclone. That is a very concerning looking one, not only because it does show the signs that it could impact the US, either Gulf or East Coast, but that intensity and just the current conditions lead me to believe that it could be a big one. So we'll be looking at all of that today, as well as just the upcoming pattern as a whole. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let's just dive into things, and let's take a look at later on this afternoon. I think that's a great place to start. Today is Sunday, July 28th. We see that there is lots and lots of thunderstorms throughout kind of this triangle between Texas, Florida, and then up center near Wisconsin. So I don't know why it's a triangle, but there it is. So that area there. We also see that there is a bit of storms across some of your northwest and north central states. So some thunderstorms around for these areas too that we need to watch for. Some activity well offshore of the East Coast. Definitely interesting, but not really impactful to anywhere except for Nantucket, Cape Cod, and Martha's Vineyard there of Massachusetts, where we could see some rain showers for sure. Let's take a look at tomorrow afternoon here on Monday, July 29th, and we see that a lot of these thunderstorms and showers have spread eastward now, to where we're seeing Minnesota and Wisconsin, Louisiana and Mississippi. Eastward, we're really seeing chances of thunderstorms for the entire eastern states east of that point. We do see that for the Pacific Northwest and I guess the Pacific Southwest of Canada. What would you call that? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. But those areas are seeing some storms move onshore as well. Typically, these are more showery, but there could be some thunder at times, of course. Heavy rainfall for those pockets over the next couple of days. Tuesday here on July 30th, we're seeing again continued storms for these northwest and southwest of Canada areas. The east, even more exclusively for Tuesday, is seeing thunderstorms from kind of the Hudson Bay down through the Great Lakes, and then to the Gulf Coast here throughout a lot of the southeast. And then for the entire eastern seaboard, we are seeing thunderstorm activity really prevailing here in the eastern fourth of the nation by Tuesday, July 30th. Wednesday, July 31st, what we're continuing to see is thunderstorms really prevailing here. Again, upper Midwest, deeper southeast, and then even up into the northeast and mid-Atlantic here. There is a little bit of a dry slot, it looks like, for the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, but that's a pretty specific detail. And I want to take a look at a couple of hours before and after. It looks like later on that evening into the next morning, we could have some thunderstorms there moving into the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, as you can see. So, but don't write off rainfall altogether, I would say, between the final day of July there into the first day of August. I think there's a chance that you guys still see some thunderstorms. And if not Wednesday, definitely by Thursday, we see these pockets do get thunderstorms, it looks like. So, yeah, definitely not a non-event for you guys whatsoever. We do see that there is some isolated and scattered thunderstorm activity moving through the southeast up into the northeast. Again, mid-Atlantic kind of missing out. Don't be surprised if that's a little bit more filled in by the time we get there. Don't want you guys to pay too much attention to the finer details because it's a little far out. We're at about 5 or 6 days here. August 2nd, Friday, we do see that there is a lot of thunderstorms once again in the east, starting from the Midwest and Ohio Valley eastward into some of the northeast, mid-Atlantic, southeast here. We're seeing lots and lots of that activity. Also, some of this monsoon activity for the Four Corner states and surrounding plains states is definitely a factor as well. We do see our tropical cyclone by this point located near the eastern Bahamas, and really the models have not faltered or really changed their opinion whatsoever. So we are seeing kind of just additional confidence because of an additional day, still just seeing the same old here. This is going to stay right offshore of the East Coast. You guys might be wondering, why am I calling this an East Coast threat if the models are showing it offshore? The important thing to note is that, a deviation of just a couple hundred miles to the west is not very hard, especially at hours 141 or beyond. So, the East Coast is potentially looking to be impacted because it's so close. And even the Gulf Coast, we have some model guidance showing it enter into the Gulf. So really, If I was to draw an area where it could impact, it would be probably something like this. So really don't write this one off for different areas because a model is showing something specific, because you got to look at the bigger picture. It could really change course to anywhere within that circle, or who knows, even beyond. As we keep going, Saturday we see this really rapidly intensifying to the north of the Bahamas. So we see that model indicating chances of development pretty high. Again, like we talked about yesterday, we have this cold front wrapping around just as this storm is moving through. And they do like to ride along these cold fronts, but what happens is the storm moves slow. And by Sunday, our cold front is just at the coast. It's probably right about here. So storminess for the East Coast for Sunday. The 4th is likely. And what this storm is going to do is it's going to meet with that cold front right offshore. So let's watch this take place here. We see it really wrap around that cold front, but the cold front is already offshore. Could see some storms for the mid-Atlantic with this if we saw this solution play out. But again, there's millions of different solutions of where this storm could go. So definitely don't lock into one here, as there's many, many different possibilities at this point, and it's going to be that way for multiple days still. Now, let's keep going. I want to take us towards Monday afternoon here. We see some storms along the East Coast, still a very intense storm offshore, likely a hurricane by this point is what this model is showing. And then by Tuesday, a lot quieter. That storm moves out. We do see some thunderstorms for the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. Also some along the Gulf and East Coasts here is definitely what we're seeing. Very, very interesting. Now, as we move on, I want to take a look at the GFS model real quickly, because again, looking at different solutions, the European model is known for being better than the GFS model, but that doesn't mean it's right every time, or that the GFS model is wrong every time. The GFS model is right sometimes, just not as much as the European model, and that's what makes it hard. That's why we have to consider all possibilities, because you never know which one is right in a particular instance. Just because one's right more of the time doesn't mean that the other one is never right, is the problem that we have. So we see this model is going to put us somewhere in the Gulf, actually, with the strikes. So again, European, I'm going to draw in the yellow. GFS model is obviously black here. We get something like this on the European model. The black is the GFS model. So very wide range of things that we're seeing. And we get this storm, really doesn't develop quite as much, which is surprising because the Gulf is very primed for activity. The GFS model usually shows crazy stuff, so I'm surprised it's just so nonchalant about it. But we see a broad area of tropical activity there in the eastern Gulf of Mexico off the west coast of Florida. And we see it intensify a tiny bit before striking the panhandle of Florida. And it actually kind of rapidly intensifies for a second there right before striking. And this would be a heavier tropical depression, tropical storm, somewhere in between there, hitting the panhandle of Florida. So nothing too intense. But again, those specific details aren't that crucial. Obviously, to see this model not showing it intensify very much might point towards there being some sort of hindrance or something holding it back from developing, because we know the waters are so warm. It's definitely something else that this model is trying to contribute it to. We know that the European model does show rapid intensification off the East Coast, so that model is showing basically nothing holding it back, whereas this model just really struggles to get its act together. Interesting. Now back to the European model, here's the total precipitation, kind of looking at a lot of activity from the upper Midwest, which we mentioned a lot today, through the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, and then the Southeast is kind of your main areas. Everywhere west of here is likely seeing below average activity. Whereas we're looking at mostly a average to above average there in the areas I indicated here in the red. As we take a look at the precipitation anomalies, we see below average for the most part out west, above average for most areas here in the east, although it gets a little bit sloppier as we have some drier pockets in Canada as well as the southeast coast, but mostly above average in the east, as we mentioned. Here's the temperature pattern. Again, we see a warmer pattern really prevail here starting around August 1st. And only lasting a few days until about the 7th, where we have a big cool down that moves down. Here's the 8th, 9th, 10th, as a brutal Arctic blast moves through, bringing about 10 to 15 degrees, maybe even 20 degrees below normal. That means if your average temperature was 90, you're at about 70 if you're 20 degrees below normal. So that is a very hardy cool down. That is a significant cool down for this time of year. If your average is 80 this time of year, imagine 60 degrees in the summertime like this would be absolutely insane. So if we do see these kind of 10, 15, 20 degree below normal amounts, that is going to bring about some very unique summertime temperatures. Let's see how long it lasts though. And we don't really get to the end of it. We get to the 12th, and this is the end of the model run, and we don't know what happens with it. But we know it will stick around for a couple of days, which is very, very interesting. Let's take a look here at your AI model, and kind of the same as what we've seen. It moves just in par with what the European model is showing through the Bahamas. Then I think it wants to curve a little bit earlier, if I'm right. So we might see a little bit of a difference there at the end. Yeah, that's exactly right. So let's see. We get it really intensifying over the Bahamas, almost striking the east coast of Florida there. Let me zoom us actually in. That would be interesting. Let me see if I can get the southeast. Perfect. Yeah, right there. So we almost get it to strike that east coast of Florida. It's very close. Definitely, if there was any wind, heavier rainfall bands with this, that would be impacting Florida at that point. But we see it rapidly intensify south of North Carolina and South Carolina. So it's dropping all the way down into like the 990s. Let's see if we can get a better view here. Might not be able to. Anyway, we just lost what we were looking at. Let me find this again. So we see it move further offshore of the East Coast, kind of moving back towards Europe again. A little bit different, but of course a very similar solution and a very similar intensity that we saw on the European model. So definitely we have that AI support, which, like I mentioned yesterday, we don't really know what that means at this point, or how much that means in terms of like if that's a really good thing for the European model, or if it doesn't really matter. We don't know that yet. We also get kind of like a second disturbance here, moving very far south through the Caribbean. So let's watch that real quickly. It moves past those eastern Caribbean islands. It wants to interact with like Jamaica and Dominican Republic a little bit, and Puerto Rico, but it kind of just moves south of there, impacting South America the whole way, or Central America, better yet. And doesn't really get its act together, probably mostly because of all that land interaction. But like we mentioned earlier, I mean, if this could just alter a little bit to the north, we're going to see a lot more development. And this model, you know, it's going to be very hard for this difference to get it right. So there's a lot of possibilities in there, and we need to watch that second threat definitely as well. Here's your European ensemble probabilities that we've been taking a look at. And actually, for the first time during the storm, we actually have seen a step back. Yesterday, we saw the two orange shades above this, 60 to 70 and even 70 to 80% here. We've seen that kind of back off a little bit, all the way back down to 50 to 60, which is still relatively high at this range, but it was looking very high. So we will track this moving forward, maybe our first sign of maybe something going against this storm actually developing. Of course, we want to be transparent here on the channel, and even though I've been expressing my concern, we're going to look at all of the possibilities and all of these models with complete transparency, of course. And hopefully this is a sign that things will back off a little bit. That would be very good, because again, very concerning look. But I want to urge all of you to not write this off just because we see one little thing moving in this kind of backwards direction as far as the chances of development. There is still a lot of model support that is showing a very intense storm that is very close to the East Coast, and even some showing some interactions with the Gulf Coast. So please continue to stay up to date with this storm. As there is just a ton of possibilities, and even 50 to 60% chance, you know, 7 days out is still pretty high. We just saw a little bit higher. Here's the tropical storm chances, and we see pretty high odds off the East Coast or even along the East Coast, some of these models showing it. So definitely something that we're going to be watching closely. And for the first time during this storm, we have a blob here over, let me see if this is perfect. We have a tiny blob of hurricane probabilities, 10 to 20% only, but we have some models showing hurricane force winds in this little tiny area. So we are seeing a little bit of progression as well in different areas along this model. So all things that we're going to be watching, of course. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Again, like I said, I urge you guys to pay attention to this storm every single day and keep up to date with all the updates. You know, I believe in full transparency, and I will always go over all possibilities and options here on the models that I can think of. Obviously, I can't do every single one, or it would take us a million years, but we will go through all of the main models and show you guys all these useful tools that maybe a lot of you have not been used to seeing. So it is an interesting perspective, and I believe that the best route in these types of situations is to give the public all of the information available, and kind of let them use discernment. And obviously it's important to give guidance along the way, of course, but I definitely believe in a more transparent approach than what's typical. So Please subscribe to the channel. Keep up to date with all of the information, like I said, because there is a chance that this storm will be a doozy for sure. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. You can even hit the bell icon, by the way, to get those notifications when we upload. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.